So the purpose of this video is just to walk you through again how to analyze figurative language and what that should look like in your written response. So remember, like we talked about in class, you should always have 3 different steps. For the first is that you're able to identify and label the figurative language. The second is that you explain to the reader how you know it is that figurative language. And the final step is that you know why the author would use that figurative language in that part of the text. So the first step is to identify and label. So for my sample, I just used song lyrics, and it's from Taylor Swift's song Mean, and I underlined my example, which is what you would be expected to do, and then I labeled it. So this is a simile, your words like knives and swords and weapons that you use against me. So I underlined it and I labeled it a simile. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to go on and explain the how. So for this purpose, I have to stop and think about, how do I know this is a simile? So the purpose for the how is to tell the reader that you actually understand the meaning of this figurative language. Again, you have to be real careful that you don't just say the definition. So I can't just say it's a simile because it compares using like or as. That's just restating the definition. I have to tie it back to the specific example. And the reason that you do this is to show that you understand how the figurative language is being used in the poem, song, or excerpt. So again, here's my example. I said it's a simile. So now I have to go in and explain how I know it's a simile. So I say it is a simile because it compares the words to knives. So the words come before the word like, and then the knives come after. Okay? So that's typically how similes are set up. Your like or your as is your context clue, and it has to be balanced on both sides. So it is a simile because it compares the words to knives, swords, and other weapons using like. So I clearly tell the reader that I know that it's a simile based on the context clues in this excerpt. Now I have to go on to the why, and the why tends to be the hardest part. The reason being, it is up to the interpretation of the reader. There is not one right answer, but you actually have to think about it. How does this figurative language impact the story? And so the purpose is to tell the reader that you understand the meaning of the figurative language. You know why it's there, the purpose of it, and how it plays into the bigger picture. So what are some of the meanings? One is that, why would they make this comparison in the first place? So why would they choose to compare the words to knives? Why would they choose to compare her to the sun? So you're actually sitting there and having to think about what these comparisons are. So your comparison would be your similes and your metaphors. And then it could also be, what is your author trying to highlight or emphasize? Why do they want to draw attention to that one part of the text? So a lot of these would be done through personifications or hyperboles or maybe an onomatopoeia. So why would they emphasize that? What is the purpose? And then the final one is conveying mood or tone. So what feeling are they trying to create? Maybe they're trying to make something sound super formal, very academic, like your textbooks. Or maybe it's trying to be very entertaining and lighthearted and informal, like the books you choose to read for your book chats. Or maybe it is trying to make the reader feel a certain way, trying to make a certain emotion come across. And so you have to be thinking about that as well. So sometimes it could be multiple of these. You just have to pick one reason and stick with it. Okay, so here's my how. We've already talked about that. Now my why. So again, I have to tie my why back to my simile and show that I understand. So the author uses this simile to show how painful the words the person against her is using. So she says that. She says words, and then she says against me. And so by making the simile knives, swords, weapons, it's obvious that she chose the comparison of things that are very painful. So that's the conclusion that I was able to draw. They're as painful as knives and other weapons. Okay, so I went on and added some clarification. You don't necessarily have to, but again, this idea of pain wasn't necessarily written in the text, I had to make that logical conclusion myself. Okay, so here's some practice ones. So if you want to do the practice, feel free to do so, and I give you the answers after each practice. These come from the poem excerpts from class this week. So this first one comes from a poem about fireworks. And so this says, and the green lanterns are calling to the high soft stars. So I would pause it here and write out what type of figurative language you think is using, how you know it's using it, and why you think the author would use this in a poem about fireworks. Okay, so here we go. The best example here is personification. Now, if you went with the soft stars and you said alliteration, that is fine. So the reason being is the repetition of the S sound at the beginning. So, or you could say consonants if you're going with the soft stars and the S at the end of stars as well. So I would accept any of those. You just have to stick with your explanation and why. So my how is this personification? The lanterns are calling, which is a human-like action being performed. So lanterns don't really call. And then my why, the lanterns are not really calling to the stars, but instead are floating towards them. So I explain that I know how this is a human-like action. Like lanterns aren't calling, so I have to make that clear. What are they doing instead? And then why would the author choose to do this? They said this to add a romantic feeling of the poem. Okay. Overall, this is a poem where they're adding a lot of figurative language to make it a more, it's not a suspenseful feeling. They use a lot of terms like this where they're calling and they have gowns and it's soft, and so it just adds to a romantic tone. So I chose to focus on a feeling the reader gets when they read it. Now you didn't have to, you could have gone in a different direction for your why, and that is fine. But make sure you're not just repeating what it says in the poem or going back and saying why the lanterns are calling. You had to think about it a little bit more. Okay, so your second practice is a poem all about America, and a couple things you might need to know. Her is in reference to America, and vigor means energy, effort, or enthusiasm. So her vigor flows like tides into my blood. So again, pause, write, go back. Okay, so this is a simile, and how you know it's a comparison of America to a tide using the word like. Why would the author choose to write this simile? There are several different reasons, and I tried to keep it more 6th grade level. So the author compares the energy of America. So again, that word vigor, I used more of the definition. So the author compares the energy of America to a tide to show how overpowering the energy of the country is on this individual and how it is now a part of them. So I had to take time to explain the simile. So for your whys in similes and metaphors, you actually have to explain what they mean, because we can't take them for surface value. You have to actually understand what the heck it's talking about. So that's what you do in your why. What is it saying? Why use it? What does it mean? Make it clear to your reader that you know what the heck it means. Your final one, this one is about jazz. So bang bang, you jazzmen band, bang all together drums. Okay, so pause, write, come back. So the best one here is onomatopoeia. And the reason is bang bang is a word that sounds like it's action. So remember, we practiced this in class. You have to specify why it is what it is. You can't just say it is a word that sounds like it's action. You have to tell me what word sounds like the action. And then why would the author use onomatopoeia? They could just said the drums make a noise, right? So for me, the why is that the author uses this onomatopoeia to emphasize the powerful sound of the drums in the band, right? The bang bang draws attention to the sound of the drums. So for me, that is why there's onomatopoeia here. You might have interpreted it slightly differently, and that is fine. Some people might say that the onomatopoeia is in here to make it more playful or fun, because jazz music is supposed to be fun and uplifting and playful, and again, that is fine as well. So it is completely open to your interpretation of it, and that's one of the beauties of figurative language, but you have to think about why would an author choose to do that. So again, we have the 3 different steps. Sorry, going backwards. You have to identify and label, you have to explain the how do you know it's that figurative language that you chose, and then why. So all 3 steps you need to do in the final part of your test tomorrow, and you'll have 3 different excerpts, and then you will go through this process. So keep practicing, use your homework that you've gotten back and look it over, and if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me before school or talk to me during ELT tomorrow. Nice job, guys.